Afternoon. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole meeting for July 13 to order, please. And who's going to lead this now? Carissa?
Sure.
Okay, we're here to discuss the ARPA funding, our discussion on where to spend the American Recovery Plan Act monies. So I'll let our county administrator lead this discussion.
So we've had ARPA funds available. We're at approximately 8.9 million. Hopefully I didn't misstate that. Don't have my notes in front of me, but of ARPA funds. They have to be spent by 2026, but you have to commit to them through contract/resolution by the end of 2024. So you are up against some timetables, but they are not like immediately in front of us. But we do need to start planning on how to commit and use these funds. We hired a consultant to help us with the claiming aspect of the funds. It's you do have to submit paperwork to the feds to determine if the use is going to be restricted or if you're going to have to have spending within certain buckets, like infrastructure or other buckets. We were able to claim ours in a way with revenue loss that it is unrestricted on the projects we can use it on. But there are still some other general restrictions. You can't pay off debt with it. You can't, balance your budget otherwise with it. So we are looking to spend it on projects. We surveyed department heads last year of some projects that they would like to have done that they didn't really feel that they could include in their budget or in other funding streams. And we do have a list of things that they would like considered for ARPA funds or other funds if they become available. And I believe most of you have seen those. We do have some other outstanding project lists that the county has tried to work into budgets over the past 5 to 6 years, and I think you've seen that too. And another general list of projects the county would like to do was submitted to NISAC in 2020 to lobby on behalf of federal legislation, the CARES Act, and that list is actually on the NISAC website of county goals, not just for the county, but some of our towns and villages. It's a very large, mostly infrastructure type projects, but I think you've all seen that list too. And those lists will give you some general ideas of things that you might want to look at. By no means is that a limit or a suggestion. Those are just things that could be looked at. I know you probably all have your own ideas as well, and I think, today each of you try to focus on a couple of ideas you'd like to talk about, and I think that's where we can start.
Thank you for the introduction, and suddenly dawned on me that it's like we've been here all day together, but we should have a roll call, probably.
Mr. Barnes?
Present.
Mrs. Burdick?
Here.
Mr. Curran?
Here.
Mr. Seer?
Here.
Mr. Demick?
Here.
Mr. Fanton? Mrs. Hanchett?
Here.
Mr. Harris? Mr. Havey?
Here.
Mr. Healy? Mr. Ricky?
Here.
Mrs. Ricketts Swales? Mrs. Root? Mr. Rumfelt?
Here.
Mr. Stocken?
Here.
13 present, 2 absent.
Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Well, I think, so you all have brought forward some ideas today you'd like to talk about, and prior to the meeting, I organized those ideas. I had our deputy, Tim Boyd, organize those ideas onto a small whiteboard so we could kind of get a feel of how many of you might be thinking of one subject over another. And maybe, Tim, you could walk us through kind of a tally of the issues presented and kind of what the feel of the board would be on those.
Sure, I'd be happy. I'm going to set the whiteboard up front. Hopefully, at least this body can see it. You all have to take my word for it. Carl, roll. As you can imagine, with 15 individuals looking at things and looking for their ideas of what they find priorities, there will be some overlap. There's some just real individual ideas that have come up. We do have 3 big consensus items. The first number received 8 tallies from this august body to look at emergency management services. There were 5 to look at issues related to the Fair Board, and there were 4 to address mental health services. The other one that received more than 1 vote was the, I must have erased that as I walked up. Let's see, what's DPW building? That's what it was. It's the problem with dry erase boards is once you get close to something, it all comes off. So we had discussions too. I'm sorry, there was 2 for county parks as well. So we're looking at county parks. My tally doesn't show that, but there was an idea to look at county parks. Other things receiving votes were parking and signage for county forests, for people to access county forests, money to, let's see, money for municipalities for small outdoor projects, parks, sewer water, or sewer issue from Belmont to the Crossroads to run that, run a line there. Also, there was a request to look at Crossroads infrastructure, better internet coverage for the county, infrastructure countywide, just that was kind of a general statement. Money for roads and bridges. There was a request to look at, or suggestion to look at some Rushford Lake improvement, Rushford and Lake improvements. Let's see. I can't even read my own writing. Training, is that training? Oh, trailways signage, yeah. Do something with the church project, that property that we had purchased earlier. Looking at economic development and Court Street parking services, 3rd floor build out, and one that I just can't read right now. Something economic development, permanent. Let me see if I can find it. So there was consensus to look at, again, or not consensus, there were a large number of folks want to address the EMS services and how we're going to take a look at that. Also looking for ideas to enhance our mental health services and service delivery system, and also to look at the possible utilization of some of these funds to address issues at the county fairgrounds. Let me find the other, yeah. So that's kind of where we're at. Some of them dovetail with things that we've seen from department heads and other folks that have looked at this. So that's the tally of your 15 cards, with the exception of, it's pictometry and flyover, so that we could look at, we have not done a flyover of the county to do the, what they do with the pictometry, they do take photographs of the county, usually when the leaves are off, or fall or spring before the leaves come out, take a look at all the properties. That would help with the assessor's office, that would help with real property, that would help with a number of folks to look at, are there new buildings coming up, what some of the other pieces might be, and a big asset for the folks in our economic and planning and economic office development. So those were the issues. So, and where you want to go from here, but that's the results.
Carissa, I remember in a conversation, you talked about that meeting that I was sad to not be able to attend at Houghton, where you divided some of the legislators' priorities into different broader subjects: public safety, buildings and grounds. What was the other one? Economic development. Would it be at all worthwhile to take some of these and divide them up into those so we can maybe get some bite-sized pieces? Or
I think that that's a good idea. And we did kind of come away with 4 main goals. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of work to be done by this board on a number of subjects, but if you were to group some of the more important ones, I think you would see those trends of public safety, economic development, our own buildings and grounds, which could include some DPW infrastructure, as well as personnel was the fourth one. Spending ARPA on personnel is a little bit more challenging than spending it on the other three buckets, but there could be things to look at. So yes, if you could divide some of these towards that. And I also took the department head suggestions of projects, some of which we've already moved forward with in this year, and we can move forward with in other ways next year with budget funds. But there are three bigger ones that I identified that probably would be a good use of ARPA funds that would benefit the county as well as some of the other municipalities and the public as well. They were mostly along the lines of software or other purchases that more than just the county would get a benefit or and use out of, so.
Can we start, since EMS seems to be the hot one, can we start with issues surrounding public safety and have a talk about that?
I think so.
It wasn't, I'll be the first to admit, it wasn't on my, EMS wasn't on my list. So I'm hoping somebody who may have had it on their list could be more specific about what the funding would be, the ARP money would be used for, to fit within the constraints of the time frame and the current situation.
I can weigh in if. okay,
Let Jim
first-
talk first.
Okay, there's several things that we can do right now with the state passing this asinine law for the fire department, but for the fire department billing. Now these volunteer fire departments that don't bill somehow have to pay for ALS interfaces. I thought maybe there's a way we can help them out there too. So they're not stuck going out of business because Fillmore, Belfast, they can't afford to pay MTS every time they come in. The other thing is we're talking about getting a CON. If we get a CON, we can actually certificate of need. So that's so we can run a county EMS through our county.
Sorry to interrupt you. Any idea what the costs are associated with that?
We're getting costs back. If we start our own ambulance service, it's going to be a few million to start up. I mean, it's probably going to pay for itself, but we're not at that step yet where we can start our own ambulance. But if we contract, we put it out to bid. So say like MTS wants to bid on staffing ambulances under the county CON, or if some other Monroe, like Wyoming County uses, or some other company, then we're not sure the exact cost yet because we'd have to get the bids in. But that's one way to help out with alleviate some of the problems we're falling under, and the county could take over the billing and just pay these squads to come in. And then we wouldn't have to rely on, we could contract with other squads if we had to, but they could all be offered, so we're not singling out one person and not running somebody out of business out of the county either. But we could just take control of and help stabilize EMS in the county instead of just giving money out there, and CON would actually give us, I think, I don't know, Fred, if you want to add anything on that.
Fred?
Well, like Jim said, we need to start somewheres. Our major line's gonna be a CON. So we need to have basically a BC, which is before CON timeline, and an AC, which is after CON. We have to meet criteria with the CON once we get there. Allison's very aware of that from what Chautauqua County's been through. So we have to meet those guidelines in a 2-year period after we establish the CON. So we need to have our ducks in a row. To start out, like Jim was talking about, we may want to look at, one of the first things we need to do, of course, is have a EMS director on its own that can work on this without being focused at other fire things or emergency service things. That person needs to be on their own because this is going to be a serious thing to put this together. Jim said the contracts, we got to look at what we can do for contracts, maybe break up the county in quadrants, get the needs for those 4 quadrants and how we can handle that. We may have to go out for RFPs for emergency service help personnel that can man ambulance that are existing. To that effect, we really won't know until we do an RFP, which can include MTS, can include other places, but is going to be an initial cost to that. And I agree with probably the $1 million to $2 million, but to turn around and end up getting that back and probably be self-sufficient years after that from doing, because we will legally have to bill. There's no getting around that. So we'll have to have billing with that. We'll start covering that to where we come back to, we're probably going to be putting money in the bank versus paying money out. Maybe in a couple years, we can look at county personnel versus hired personnel from MTS or wherever. I'm sure most people are going to want to work for the county versus a private company is a little more established. Our needs are certainly there to look at that. But that kind of gets us in the area to move ahead. That kind of lays it out a little bit. I mean, there's certainly more to talk about. We've got the EMS council going, so there's going to be a lot of things on a plate. But we got to get work to, so we can establish this CON and be prepared. If we have ambulances and contracts and RFPs in place, we gotta put the narcotics in some of these ambulances, be set up for the ALS, and how we're going to do that. That's our next steps.
So Carissa, one of the concerns that you've raised before is whether or not something is a permitted use or whether or not it's an appropriate use of the money. Does all of that they were just talking about sound like it's permitted or appropriate?
My best guess is yes. So again, we do have the consultants who will be doing all our reporting for us. And when we kind of narrow in on a project, I would think probably one of the first calls we'd want to make to them and just say, this is what we're thinking of. Could you verify that's something you're going to be able to submit the claims for? Or not really so much claims, but reporting to the feds on how we're using the money. So I think you could do all that. That is a lot. That's a lot of homework to do before we're going to be able to have something specific to then spend on, so, right.
But once you've done that homework, you could stand it up. I mean,
I
it's
would
not,
think so.
It's not a 18-month building project or something like that.
And I'm assuming just from the general concerns and the urgent nature of EMS that we'll probably want to go forward with that regardless of whether ARP is attached or not. We'll want to be doing our homework on this anyways. So the two just are gonna run concurrent with each other as well. So. Do you have other things on EMS or public safety that you want to talk about? I mean, as long as we're on that, you asked about the EMS stuff, but is there something more general, more
In our
specific?
original conversations on that, the other piece was security. But some of that's already being taken care of.
Correct, that, I don't believe security is an issue I don't think that was something for ARP money. I think we've already spent on that and continue to budget for.
You had targeted the 911, I'm sorry, did I interrupt you?
Jan had her
No,
hand
go
up,
ahead,
she did.
go ahead.
The 911 records management software is now an appropriate time for you to talk about that?
Yes, I can talk a little bit about one of the requests that came out of the sheriff's office. And again, this is going to be there whether or not you use ARP money. It was approximately $400,000, so I would suggest thinking about ARP money. Is records management system for law enforcement. SJS is the state system. It is no longer supported. That's what all law enforcement agencies have used for records management up until now, and the state police are the biggest consumer of SJS. They are going to a different software system between October and December of this year, and it's not one that will be able to be shared with municipalities. So every county, town, village, police force is going to need a records management software of their own because SJS is not supported, main customer is no longer there. It probably won't be useful for many going forward. Looking at purchasing our own through a Tyler company. We deal with Tyler on a number of other software products, including our financial management and the CAD system. They're very reputable. They have a very good model out there that the Sheriff's Office has demoed and looked at. It's one I've looked at with them. IT has as well. It looks good. It's something that we could put in place for the county law enforcement records management, but we could also provide to all the villages, towns that have law enforcement, and we'll need this as well. So we could have licenses that we could give out to the municipalities and build that into our purchase price going forward. There's a maintenance cost, and we could divide that amongst the municipalities so that they provide a little bit each year for maintenance. I don't believe it would be that much going forward, but we'd get the main cost out of the way for us. It's something I believe every law enforcement agency would need. So that'd be a way for us to spend it on something we need, but also share with the municipalities a service. And it falls under public safety. So, and I don't know, Legislator Rumfeld, you probably are pretty familiar with SJS, and this is something we're just going to have to do, I believe, at some point.
Yeah, it looks like they gave us patchwork for it, so looks like we got about a year maybe to play with it before it's gone completely. I mean, it's still not great, but the system that the sheriff department's providing looks a lot better, and we can do a lot more with it.
So we have one we want to pick out, but we'll still need to go out for a request for proposals to meet our own procurement guidelines to make sure we've got quotes from other systems as well. But there is one that I think that leads amongst the others and other counties are using as well. So that was just one idea. Yes, Legislator Burdick.
Can I go back to the EMS, please? I have several questions about it. Number one, is it typical for a county to have an ambulance service?
I think more and more so. Yeah, every county is struggling, particularly the rural counties, and a lot of them have gone to a MuniCon or municipal CON to try to help us. Some contract with other agencies, some run their own ambulance services. There's a number of different models out there right now.
The counties that we've got advice from or that we're working with a little bit, Wayne County started out with just ALS interface, the flag cars, so to say. Now they're moving to ambulance because they're struggling so bad with the volunteers. Livingston County does ambulances. Wyoming County, I believe, the state, when they met with the state, said they contract out with Monroe for ALS services. So there are, Chautauqua County does something. A lot of counties actually contract out with AMR, which is an ambulance service, which from what I was told by one of the representatives, they wouldn't even bid down here because we don't do 15,000 calls a year. So yeah, there is a lot of counties, more and more are switching to it because of the state of the volunteer organizations. As much as some people don't like MTS, they've actually been a blessing for us in some part. They've hurt us in some part with some of the squads saying, well, MTS is going to take it anyways, but without them, where would we be right now? But they've even came here telling us how they're struggling and for help and this is one way to kind of go out and try to figure out. I mean, we've lost, Angelica doesn't have an ambulance squad anymore. We lost that. There's a couple other squads that are talking about closing their doors. What's going to happen? What's going to happen if one service can't provide enough ambulances and staffing to cover it? Then you're going to be out of luck. And right now with this billing coming in for the volunteer firemen, the volunteer fire departments that have ambulances, a lot of them don't want to bill because of the way their organizations are ran up. So how are they going to afford to cover the ALS interfaces that the state requires? It's just like an unfunded mandate from the state. They're requiring these ambulance corps to pay for the ALS interface out of their own pocket instead of allowing the ALS interface to bill the patient. So, I mean, it's in a nutshell.
And without really getting the municipal CON, you're just a passive participant in the system. You're hearing the problems, and you're looking at your emergency services director to try to coordinate these services as far as to be able to advocate to see what the problems are. but you're not really able to help fund it or try to coordinate through contracts or provide other means. If you do the municipal CON, that makes you an active participant that can help try to solve the problem with county resources.
If a volunteer ambulance wanted to continue, will this put them out of business, or will they be
No.
able to continue on their own?
I think,
I think it'll help them.
I do too, because I
think
think we
it'll
could
be-
contract with them.
Right, we can, yeah, we could actually, the municipal CON, and one of the big things is like Elmond always complains that they can't use Alfred anymore. And it would help us where we could contract, where Alfred could get toned out initially with Elmond and go there. That's one of the big that I hear every day, because I work over in Alfred. But, so I think it'll actually help them. I think it'll actually bring us where we can do the billing, we can do the, I don't think it'll put any of the volunteers, I think it'll actually help. And where we might be able to staff, have a company, like say Friendship needs an EMT during the day, but they have drivers, we could staff somebody over there, ALS over there maybe, with their rig, it's just different things, different ideas you can look at. But I think it'll help
That
'em.
was one of my questions too, is what's going to be the call time? I mean, like right now, I know MTS sits up at Dunkin' Donuts. And so if they get called to Alfred, it's 20, 25 minutes before they're going to get there. And Alfred has their own ambulance, but MTS usually shows up too. And so that was my concern, is time. But also then down the road, is the county actually going to own ambulances and employees?
Again, for the last question, different models. Some counties do own equipment and have employees. Some counties do not own any, but then contract out. And I don't know if there's a way to answer that question until we start looking at what models would fit best here. I don't think we have some ideas, but don't know. And on the first question, I think the point of being an active participant would be to improve the response rates by looking at the different situations and performing the best relationships and contracts you could to make sure those response rates are as small as possible, that people are getting out as a quick response. So, and Jim, I saw you were going to hit that button, so.
Yeah, there's, with response time, we'd have to look, and we have models from other squads. But if you look at different ways of doing things, like Wellesley Ambulance contracts with a company called E5, which they just staff a medic every day. So Wellsville has a medic covered in their count and their jurisdiction, which is SIO, Wellsville, Willing, Alma. So they always have a medic on, except for Saturdays. And we could contract for that, or we could eventually buy our own ambulances if we decide that's the way to go. So we could start out one way and then eventually within the 2 years switch to, and maybe like I would recommend starting out contracting with somebody first and establishing what we need and guidelines and working with the EMS advisory board and figuring out what to do and what the best action is.
2 more questions, then I'll be done. Right now, I know it is very difficult to get volunteers or anyone because the training is so expensive. So even if this becomes a county service, or if we contract, is that going to continue to be a problem getting people?
Carissa and I have been talking about this, and one thing we talked about possibly doing is if it's a county, or like if it's run by the county, sending the people to paramedic school, but they have to sign an agreement where they work for us for 3 years. So basically, like the sheriff department sends people to the police academy, then they have to sign a contract where they're going to stay. We would send the people to paramedic school, probably the closest one we could find, and then they agree to a 3-year window, because right now the state's doing away with the critical care, which is 90% of our medics in this county are critical care. And once they do away with, I think the sunset is at 27 or 29. And once they get away with that, we're hurting. So we talked about if they're county employees, maybe even if not, but if there's a way around it, but if they're county employees, sending them to paramedic school and then having them agree to stay for 3 years.
And then my last question is, we have to spend this money in, 2 years? Is this even possible to get this all going in that amount of time and have the money spent? I mean, it sounds really, I'm not saying I'm in favor of it. It's just, is it possible in 2 years to get this all done?
I think that's where this is something, if the board I do believe where the board is serious about this topic, we need to run it concurrent with the ARPA funding, because there probably are things that won't be able to fit in the ARPA timeline, but we'll need to just move forward with it anyways. And there might be things that we're surprised to find out we could do this or that in the next 2 years, and we can use the ARPA. So I think they're
And-
important to run together.
I think we could start it, we could start it up right away as soon as we get the CON.
Yeah.
And the startup cost initially was going to be the problem. After that, a lot of the places that do this are actually bringing in income. Some of the counties we've talked to are actually bringing in money because of the transports, the Medicare reimbursements, the Medicaid and insurance reimbursements. But I think, I mean, we got this far right now, and Adam and Fred and I have been really pushing the issue and really driving it. And I think we can get started up before the end of the year if we get the CON. So.
Yeah, just to let you know, I really appreciate the time and effort you folks have put into this, so, because I think it's really important. In fact, that was one of the things I put on my card. But if I pick up on this, once the ARP money is gone, we would be responsible for funding whatever part of the operation that we have left over.
Well, I don't think you're obligated to continue anything after the fact. So if you're going to dedicate ARPA money for a contract with, let's say, an ambulance service, that contract's going to run through 2026. If you choose not to renew it in 2027, I don't think you're obligated to do that after that. I think your obligation is to spend that money through 2026.
I think it's important enough so that we should be looking down the road that may be part of what we'll have to do, right?
Oh, yeah, that's why I think, again, run this conversation concurrent with ARPA, but don't make it dependent on ARPA, because if you're interested in doing this, we need to find a way to make it a long-term thing.
That's why I think we should start it up with ARPA and then find a way to fund it, unless it funds itself. But like I said, I'm getting models. I'm going to get models of what other counties do and see how they make out, see how much it costs, and how much if they make money off it. I've told by a couple they actually break even. They're not in it to make money, and they break even. So hopefully we can at least do that.
If I could just expand on some of that. I think for the most part, counties are not into services for making money. So this would be more of an enterprise. Basically, it would be set up as its own enterprise fund, and any money that would be generated from fees would offset all the expenses of the program or service, and then it would be kept in that fund to be able to enhance, equipment or whatever continually. So it really wouldn't be a business, for instance. It would be more like a service that would in it essentially fund itself. I mean, that would be a great goal for that to happen, but it probably isn't going to happen for a long time. But there are means of doing that and setting that up, and we would have to explore all of that.
And Terry, just kind of going on the service in general, we talked about billing and whether the county is billing or we're going to take on the billing responsibilities for others. That's something we're not set up to do as a county right now, is we don't bill. That's something we've talked about for other things that, we'd need to buy the software module for our financial software to allow us to do that. So those are different costs. They're boring costs, but they are going to be necessary costs with this that we might want to consider ARPA funds for as well. They're not real expensive ones, but if you start adding up small things like that, you could be using ARPA funds for.
Right, the structure of all that would have to be certainly determined. I mean, obviously, there are places in the county that provide services that bill Medicaid, Medicare already, insurance companies, and we would just have to expand on that and see how that program would actually work for us and what we would need in addition to what we have. So those funds, could come from ARPA, and obviously, I think a hybrid is a great way to look at this particular project, because we don't even really know what the cost could be even to start it up, let alone what it would be to operate the entire project. So
what would be the possibility, like most of the squads that bill in this county use an outside billing agency and they just take a percentage of the bill? Would that be legal for our county to do or no?
I believe you can contract with billers. Yeah, you just have to have the right things in place, and you'd have to put out the right quotes and RFPs and all of that to be able to, make sure you're doing it fairly. But I do believe that that is an option to contract.
Yeah, I think, Terry, I think you hit on it. If you could set it up as an enterprise separate, that would be the best way to do it. I agree, yeah.
Is there anything, maybe since we were kind of bucketed some things, is there anything else in like the public safety bucket that you wanted to talk about? How would you like to go? Would you like to talk about, EMS was the number one response in the tally earlier today. We asked for those opinions. Would you like to just go down that, or would you like to try going towards economic development or buildings and grounds?
A lot more in property.
Krista, before we move on, just to understand a little bit, how does 911 fall into it, and what kind of costs are there to get us back on order? Is it more just a personnel issue? Is it equipment?
I think,
And then,
for and I'm sorry, I'm just kind of
right.
processing the question. 911 doesn't have, I think we were talking about the EMS portion, and then the law enforcement records management, I don't believe is a 911 records management. I'm not sure. I think when the list was compiled by the consultants, they put 911 down there, but I think they were really talking about the law enforcement portion, not the dispatching portion, if I have that correct, Jim. SJS doesn't really dispatch, it's more for law enforcement records management, which 911 uses to some
Right.
degree, but.
SJS is more law enforcement. Pertaining to EMS, how they could work is there's apps that they have on the CAD system that would help the volunteers. And if they could, like they did with law enforcement, they put CADs in our cars. They got a grant for computers. They had a CAD system, so we can get on and get a call, so we don't have to keep bugging them on the radio, or they know we're responding. And some of the EMS agencies requested something similar, but right now, because of funding and stuff, I don't think and that could help in that aspect where.
And this particular software also had the ability for people in the field to use their cell phones as well. It was very versatile that way.
Yeah, there is an app where like the IM responding that some of the squads use, that if the county went on board with it, they would know who's responding. I mean, they're complaining about radio traffic as it is with the fire and EMS. If we had this in the CAD system, they could get right on and we'd know they're responding without tying up critical airtime too, so.
I'm just going to maybe jump, like I said, I had identified 3 things out of the department head requests that I thought were easy spends. One was the law enforcement thing. The other one was a pictometry flyover, which actually did make someone else's list here too. And I believe that could be worked into the GIS system and would be useful for our law enforcement to have up-to-date pictometry. It would be also useful for economic development. The pictometry is usually accessible to other municipalities, other public users as well. So that might be something you might want to consider. And I had it highlighted as something, it's a bigger investment. It was maybe just shy of 300,000. We haven't done one, I think maybe a decade or so. So our pictures are out of date. And you have to book this about a year and a half out. And that's why if that's something you want to consider doing, we could get moving on getting the quotes and getting it ready for next summer or the following summer so that it's committed and spent by 2024.
Carissa, that would work with the system that planning has now? Because they do something with municipalities that they can get on.
I
but it's
believe
just the
so.
pictures.
And this request originated from the planning office, but it's something that they've been trying to lobby for the past 3 or 4 years at
heard it,
least.
yeah, and I-
Yeah.
But they have something now, it's just not updated, and that's what
Correct.
this component is. Okay.
Yeah.
Get it.
Towns, a lot of towns use this.
Yeah.
I can't say all towns do, because I don't know, but I know that
Right.
it's very, very
Okay.
handy when it's
And
up
for
to date.
multiple offices, code, assessment, it touches a number of different offices, but it does come into the public safety background, so I thought I might as well put that conversation here too.
Phil, can I just say that I like the two that you've presented so far, Chris, because of what you said. The pictometry has countywide use. I'm thinking about this money, and the purpose of this money was to rejuvenate local economies and to put us back on our feet, so to speak, or to give us an opportunity to do something that we otherwise wouldn't be able to scratch up the funds to do. So that's why I really like the pictometry thing and how it spreads out across different levels of government and across different departments. And I really like the 911 one, because it's the same thing. It's something our local municipalities can use, and it's something that's going to have broad appeal. There are things that we're going to talk about, I know, and I guess I've mentioned this before, but doing things within the county office building, like replacing windows, are good and important things to do, and we should consider them, but they're not, I don't think, the best use of ARP money. Now, can we do a little of this and a little of that? I think we can. But just one more point, I think, I've noticed you've said it twice. The big ticket items are probably the ones we should be considering first out of the ARP money, because from a budget officer's perspective, they're the hardest ones. If you still have to do it, they're the hardest ones to pack into a budget. And so I think we should keep that in the back of our mind too. Thanks.
Carissa, can I, going back to your original statement about being able to put them into like categories kind of seems to make a lot of sense to me. And looking at this list, even things like trailhead markers and stuff really could fit under economic development. And is there a way for us to package it that way? Like we've got our main, like buildings and grounds and the things that you talked about, and to list under there these things, break it up into those ways with costs, and let's take a look at it that way and say, we want these 4 out of this one. I mean, I don't know if that's easy or hard or.
I think it would be helpful to me, the administrative team, and the rest of the departments who are going to ultimately implement whatever it is
Right.
that this board wants. Because we'll take the EMS conversation. We know EMS is an important goal, but that conversation about how you're going to spend the money and what you're spending it on is so nebulous. The board hasn't identified, we're going to purchase this or we're going to contract for this particular service. So that's going to require a lot of homework and a lot of background research. Whereas, we need this records management software is a very specific thing the sheriff's office identified with a big ticket item. I think come back with a list of, here are the broad, grand ideas that are nebulous, and here are some specific things, and how can we work with our department heads to maybe narrow them down into ways to spend that ARPA money, and go through those 4 buckets would be helpful. And I think, like you said, most of the things this board has identified that maybe weren't on those lists probably could be matched up. We might not be able to fund all of a municipal CON through ARPA money, but we could maybe make that work with a couple other things and get that going and do this, and then move on to buildings and grounds and move on to economic development. So that would be good.
Yeah, I think so. I think it would be helpful for us too. Sorry. I think it would be helpful for us too, but also I didn't know the pictometry or whatever, but I agree, that's a great thing and it fits in a bunch of places. So, if we could just keep a chart or we could have a list, that would be great.
If I could just say, I think we have the buckets. I think we need the projects to put in the buckets from you guys. that's my opinion, is I think we've got plenty of ideas on here, but what is it that the board really wants to push forward? And then you can put it back in the bucket. Because I think that's where, I think at the committee, the whole meeting we had before, we established the buckets. You know, the buckets were the 4 buckets, you know, minus 1, that we could really put projects in. But then we need the details to be able to get the background of how to do the detail to put it back in the bucket. So it's kind of a 6 of one, half a dozen the other at this point, I think. Without any details from what projects you want us to work on, we can't dive into it and say, okay, this is gonna need a proposal for this is gonna need a proposal for that. And, you know, and just to kind of expand on the law enforcement portion of the records management and the pictometry, even though they're going to be quick checkoffs that we can get started on, they still are going to require some work. We're still going to have to put RFPs out. We're going to have to get the dollar amounts, and you guys still are going to have to approve if you want to spend that money on that, depending on what the cost comes in at. So there's still a lot of work for us to get back to you to say, yes, we're going to go for that. Yes, we're going to go for that. So.
And also, if there, I know we've had discussions throughout the day about, well, what if something comes up that the board identifies as an emergent need or an emergency? If there is something that you as a board of legislators identify as an emergency or an emergent need, well, then that's something that needs to be addressed both on a legal basis first, because it could result in a liability for the county if we do not look at it. And also financially, from what Terry has said to you before, we have ways that we can pay for, and Krista too has said this to you, there are ways that we can pay other, buckets of money that we can pay for these things. So you need to address that with us so we can address those emergent needs. So if there is something with, community services, mental health, or if there is something with EMS that we need to start now and maybe not wait until we figure out these, buckets of the ARPA process, we can do that too.
We save for a rainy days. So when they come along, we have savings we can put towards that, whether it's contingency or other funds. They are usually available for most emergencies.
One of the things that I think would really help to define what it is, as you can see, we've had this list, and there are a number of great ideas that come out. We know there are a number of buckets. Maybe if we looked at it from the perspective of, we're going to spend X amount of money in this particular line item, you give us, maximum spends per bucket, then that would help us to define and look at the costs and prioritize, but then bring back to you to get your input on it. Because we could talk all day about these ideas, but if we don't know what the limit is, do we want to spend $7 million on public safety? We want to spend $250,000. So I think if one, again, just a suggestion or a thought, if we had an idea of what we wanted to spend per bucket, that gives us an idea of how we prioritize. Maybe we can do one big ticket, one small ticket, still address a couple of needs, but we really need to have, kind of some parameters or thresholds of what you want to take a look at. So
I think you prioritize spending by a particular project's importance to the board. It's pretty clear that EMS is the number one board priority right now. So that would indicate to me that it should get some money,
Yeah, I don't disagree. I guess the question would be is how much, is there a limit on what you want to spend per bucket? It is a big priority, but I think just having an idea of how we want to approach it would be helpful for us. Maybe I'm off base, but just, that's why I sit at the back table.
Excuse me. I guess what I'm thinking about, we don't even know, I wouldn't even have a clue of the cost, so are we putting enough in there or not enough? I hear what you're saying, and it makes sense, but if we don't have a clue of, and maybe we put 2 million in there and we needed 4 million, or, you know what I mean? Maybe guidance in that.
I think maybe just setting the target and allowing
Okay.
us to come back and say, here's some ways to move forward, or Oh, gosh, thank you for giving us that big of a target. But the more we talked about it, it turns out that, there's other grant funds available and we can reduce that target and push that money towards another bucket would help too. Because it's tough. It's tough for you guys, just as EMS, as much research as Legislator Rumfeld has done on it. We can't say that, a contract is going to cost X amount today. We need to do a lot of homework before we get down to a dialed in, this is what we're doing and this is how much it costs. And there could be, like I said, other monies available to add to it.
But in this sheet we had, like there's pictometry and then 21, 350,000. So maybe up a little bit, but that's a ballpark to have in your mind?
And those are pretty good ballparks because, our department heads did, on those three, some research on the pictometry. I think Kier's quote would need to be updated, but that's pretty close. The other two numbers I put in there are pretty spot on from recent quotes. So.
What were our points again? I've got emergency services. Mental health falls under human services.
Well, it does, but I think you could look at it two different ways. We have committees set up where we say public safety are these offices and they report to that, and human services are these ones. But in the broader scope of non-committee language, mental health is a public safety type service. So, if public safety in general is your goal, making sure that people's mental health is addressed so that public safety is enhanced is certainly within that bucket of thought. It goes towards everyone's well-being and safety.
The original buckets were public safety, economic development.
said you were done.
Buildings and county needs was one bucket. And then there was a personnel bucket. But, I wrote down the 4 buckets today and added emergency instead of personnel, so.
Public safety, the emergency services does fit under public safety. This is how my mind works, guys. Sorry. Let's focus. So, public safety, I've got emergency services and mental health under there, so that's one of our buckets, right? And we want to decide a general amount or a general way to go towards that. I'm sorry, I'm sort of taking over here, but I'm just trying to think this out loud, and I'm a picture kind of drawing person. So then our second bucket would be economic development, and a lot of what Tim wrote down there falls under economic development.
Can you turn your mic on, please?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's just how I think. Yeah.
Thinking along the broader voice.
Economic development, yeah, and you can put all of those things that Tim had, or we had written down under economic development. Sorry, the marker you gave me really doesn't work very well.
I'm sorry, do you want to talk about some of the projects that might fall under economic development that you've identified? 'Cause I can see where some of them do trend in that direction.
Don't write on the wall.
The problem, I think, with economic development then is that,
Stand in the corner. They won't bleed through on the wall.
yeah, I'll have to write it here. Economic development, we have to figure out what direction, like those trailheads and all of that, that goes back to what I said earlier this morning about how economic development, we kind of have to decide, we have this whole Western New York wilds, and signage and all of the forest stuff goes along with that. And that's how I'm going, but then some of the other things we're doing in economic development don't necessarily complement that always. So that's a problem in my world.
And we also have other funds available for economic development. I mean, there is fund balance set aside for economic development, so don't feel as though ARPA funds are the only thing you have to spend on that. And we can always budget more for it as well, because we usually do give it a pretty good budget. Are there projects, do you want to talk about some of these, like the county park and the trails? Is that something that this board wants us to work on, finding specific projects and costs associated with that? Yes, Gary?
See, like, when you talk about trails and signs, I go back to what Brooke was saying, that you do a few of those things that aren't huge money, but everybody in the county sees them and benefits from it. And that, I'll be honest, when I looked at the thing, I was trying to think, okay, here's something that you come to budget time and some of these big things, we have to do that, folks. We got to figure out, are we going to take it out of reserves? Are we going to borrow or something? We got to do these things regardless. And yet some of these smaller things, 350 there, 200,000 there, we can't touch those and they just get pushed off. Where this is a great opportunity to scarf up a bunch of those little things, like little, and do it, because we're going to do those big things regardless. One way or another, they have to be done.
Sometimes it's nice to have a tangible project we can all see and feel versus a service that you're happy is enhanced, but you don't think of until you need it or a loved one needs it, so. And I think Gary had a point.
Well, I just wanted to bring up I put down on my list county park. Obviously, we don't have a real county park. It's not a big thing, because there are other state parks and so on and so forth in the area, but it just seems to me that, and the other thing that I highly recommend, or top of my list, was the Fair Board. I think that we need to do something with the Allegheny County Fairgrounds as an economic development, being able to have productions of where you can entertain 1,500 or so people at the Allegheny County Fairgrounds with different types of programs and shows and so on and so forth. Right now, that's suitable for derbies, crash derbies or whatever it is, but that's about it. It's not suitable for anything else. 40 years ago, we had several different groups using those the county fairgrounds for shows, etc., which brings people to the county. Right now, there's nothing. It's nothing. It's not a suitable site. Needs to be upgraded, and I think it's worth an investment by the county. How it would be done, I don't know.
I think that there's a lot to be said for that. There is no space like that in the county, whether public or private. The large event spaces we have tend to be schools that have to operate on their own school schedule and can't just, rent out a space when they feel like it. And that goes for county parks as well. There aren't a lot of outdoor spaces like pavilions, recreation halls, or other. It's just where do you go to have a large scale meeting that's not a school around here? There aren't many places like that. Whereas sometimes county parks do have those facilities within them. Both of those are really good goals to have. I think the fair is probably an easier one as far as property that's already there. They already have some infrastructure in place. They have hosted large events. If you wanted to go that direction, it's probably one that's easier to imagine and as something very tangible. Obviously, we don't own that property. We'd have to work with the Fair Board on those goals, as well as how to administer the money, because, again, they'd be a third party. They'd be subject to all the federal procurement guidelines, and they might not be set up. I think their board's mostly volunteer. I don't even think they have someone that administers really on behalf of them. So we'd have to help them meet all the procurement and contract management guidelines, I'm assuming. So
Didn't you, what I understood in that to help the Fair Board may be easier not to use ARPA money, but use our other money because of that very thing.
possibly. I mean, it depends, I think, on how you were to structure your contracts, but depending on how big of a project you want to do, you might want to use the ARPA money too. that's the point of big projects. It's tough to budget really big numbers. So if you're looking 500,000, a million, 2 million to put into some sort of event center, you might better just bite the bullet and figure out how to help them manage the contracts to meet the procurement guidelines under ARPA. Because those would be tough numbers to budget.
I was thinking of the requests they already have in.
I think even those were nearing 500,000.
Correct. I think that the request ended up, with the initial request they made and the additional request with the bid from the contractor, I think we were headed toward $500,000. I've said it to a few people as we've talked about the fair, and I think the one thing from my side of the fence, I guess, is that we have to be able to think outside the box. And maybe, the fair's maybe a perfect example of partnering with some other agency to develop it into a